Okay, it is 5:30 on, on Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. And this is the regular meeting of the Learning and Teaching Committee for Community Unit School District 303, calling to order at 5:30. And to start with, citizen comments. Do we have citizen comments? Okay, thank you. Okay, it looks like we have one citizen comment, so she's coming.
I'll begin reading while we're en route. The school code provides for a public comment period at each board meeting, subject to reasonable constraints. The practice of this board is to limit public comment to 3 minutes per speaker, to a total of 30 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers addressing the board are expected to maintain a reasonable level of civility. Also, personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. Comments regarding individuals should be respectful. Insults and defamatory remarks have no place in this setting. The board will terminate public comment if speakers cannot adhere to these guidelines.
And we are waiting for a speaker to come in the room. Speaker is Karen Freeland, and her topic is in-person learning.
Yep. Hi.
Hello, and this is Karen Freeland, and your topic is in-person learning.
Yes.
And we kind of read the preamble en route, so just the general speech we make before. So
All right. Okay.
you are up and ready to go.
Okay. I just printed something off, so I figured that'd be easier, so I wouldn't lose track of what I wanted to say. Just a bit of a background of me. I do have a medical background. I was a dental nurse for 10 years and grew up in Melbourne, Australia, and also worked in London at some of the best oral surgeon practices in London. I also worked at the Midway Hospital in London, which is one of the most infectious diseases hospitals in London. You may recall it was the one that late Princess Diana went to with HIV patients. I worked there when she was there. So I'm very familiar with viruses and bacteria and things like that. I've lived in South Elgin for the last 18 years. My children have gone through all the District 303 schools. And I had a senior graduate last year, and I currently have a junior at St. Charles North. He had signed up for the in-person learning back in August, and out of the 8 classes, he only has 4 teachers present currently in school. One of them is PE, so really he only has 3 classes. All sports have been closed down since November, and he's been unable to really participate in his Adventure Ed program. It's been too cold to go outside. The pool is closed because of the guidelines. The gym as well. The locker rooms are closed, so he hasn't been able to do any of his Adventure Ed PE. So he has one day at school where basically no one is there. He does an aerospace engineering class, which he hasn't been able to do. He is part of the Project Synergy program that was instituted 5 years ago. So he has a very strict schedule that he has to follow, and unfortunately this situation has stopped a lot of his learning. The aerospace, the teacher's been quite accommodating. He's tried to put all the theory into the first semester, and all the practical is supposed to be done this semester. And that hasn't started. They're supposed to be designing and building and launching rockets out in the field, so that's not going to happen anytime soon considering the weather as well. He also has been in class where I now know that the OWL cameras, where the $300,000 was spent to have those installed through the school. From what I understand, there's quite a few teachers trying to implement the cameras. There's a few struggles and a few kinks to work out. But I also know there's a lot of teachers electing not to use them at all. I feel that these should be a mandatory item in use, not only for the students within the class, but it's beneficial for those that have chosen remote. It does give them a full class experience where the teachers can walk around and interact with all the students in the class and all those, also the ones that are at home, because they can hear all the activity that's going on in the classroom. With them not using the cameras and then using Chromebooks, my son is actually sitting in class looking at his Chromebook, talking to his teacher who is at home. That is not in-person learning. So when I filled out the survey for in-person learning, it was for him to be in person and not to be in class with his teacher sitting at home. Fortunately for me, I have been able to find a tutor that has been able to come to my home on a weekly basis and help him with his schoolwork. He does a lot of AP classes and honours classes. And with him doing those classes, he is also helping other students in his classrooms. A lot of students don't particularly care to be exposed on camera in front of other students when asking questions. I know my son just puts a blank picture on the screen of some remote photograph that he found online. It's not him. He has the Chromebook sitting in class. He has the desktop sitting next to him, and he also has his iPhone set up. With those three things going, he has Discord, Snapchat, iMessage, and FaceTime all running at the same time. He uses this with the other students to help with them with their classwork. He is spending his days with the whiteboard and the red erase marker, FaceTiming students and explaining math work and physics problems because the students are uncomfortable reaching out in public with the Chromebooks. I feel like if the teacher is actually in the classroom, students are more likely to either with eye contact or a slight wave of a hand get a teacher's attention, and it's more discreet for them to seek out problem solving rather than being fully exposed in the classroom in front of all the students, and they all know that they're having troubles. This meeting is also, for me, it's not about anyone's feelings. I don't care about anyone's feelings. This is about all the facts that are out there right now. I did some research online today, and these were all within the last couple of months. This pandemic has been around for 10 months, so obviously in the beginning it was a huge unknown. But in the medical field, a lot of things have changed since then. The death rates are nowhere near as high as what they were in March and April of last year. There was a collaborative study done last week between Duke University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Researchers discovered that among 11 school districts with nearly 100,000 staff and students, there were no instances of children passing the coronavirus to adults during in-person instruction. Researchers found that just 32 cases of either kid-to-kid or adult-to-adult coronavirus transmission over a 9-week period. The study also then slammed school policies that ask individuals to self-quarantine if they come within 6 feet of a person infected with the coronavirus for more than 15 minutes, even if both individuals wore masks. The study calls the policy counterproductive, as transmission as the coronavirus when properly wearing a mask is uncommon in school settings. Researchers also said the policy sends a mixed message to the public on the benefit of face coverings. The study concluded that schools should stay open safely in communities with widespread community transmission. Everyone heard about what was going on in Germany recently with a rise in cases. They just did a study out of Berlin. Very few of 2,000 school children and teachers tested in the German state of Saxony showed antibodies of COVID-19. A study found on Monday this week suggesting schools may not play a big role in spreading the virus as some had feared. Germany began reopening schools last May, though debate continues to the role children may play in spreading the virus to vulnerable adults at home, as well as to older teachers and school staff. The study by the University Hospital in Dresden analysed blood samples of over 1,500 children aged between 14 and 18 and 500 teachers from 13 schools in Dresden and the districts of Bautzen and Görlitz in May and June. The largest study conducted in Germany on school children and teachers including testing in schools where there are coronavirus outbreaks. Of the almost 2,000 samples, only 12 had antibodies, said Ryan Hardburner from the University Hospital of Dresden, adding the first results gave no evidence that school children play a role in spreading the virus particularly quickly.
If we can, we're supposed to limit the comments to 3 minutes. So.
I know, but you had half hour set up here, so if you just give me a couple more,
Yeah, no,
I think that should be fine.
Just if you can.
Just a note on that, he said the children may actually even act as a break in the infection. Berner told of a news conference saying infections in schools had not led to an outbreak, or while the spread of the virus within households was also less dynamic than previously thought. Dr. Fauci recently said the default position we should have is to bring the children back to school and keep them in school. Another item is that COVID-19 outbreaks aren't driven by in-person classes, and there's a statement from the CDC. The return of in-person classes in nearly 2/3 of the US hasn't led to a rash of community outbreaks, federal scientists said in a study of 2.87 million cases among the age of those 24. And in San Francisco this week, a group of Bay Area doctors are calling for California to open up their schools as soon as possible. They are finding also that they say they lost 10 months of learning and mounting social isolation caused the closures outweigh the risk posed by the opening. Just the general suffering of the students. And the American Academy of Pediatrics noted that keeping schools closed places children and adolescents at considerable risk of morbidity and, in some cases, mortality. The pediatrics guidance concluded that everyone should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. There's other items here with the study from Yale that also says that students should be in school. There's another one from DC, Puerto Rico. These are all available online. There's another one recently out of Spain where they had the huge outbreak. They actually found that the recent second wave of coronavirus started before the school year began in September, and still cases in one region dropped 3 weeks after school reopened, while others continued to remain stable and other ones stayed flat. The other issue I have is the suicide rates. It was stated that Center of Disease Control Director Robert Redfield said in a Buck Institute webinar that suicides and drug overdoses have surpassed the death rate for COVID-19 among high school students. Redfield argued that lockdowns and lack of public schooling constituted a disproportionately negative impact on young people's mental health. He said that, but this is his quote, but there has been another cost that we've seen, particularly in high schools, Redfield said. We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than were deaths from COVID-19. We're seeing a far greater deaths from drug overdose that are above excess, that we had a background, that we are seeing deaths from COVID-19. All I want to say is that I understand those that wish to do remote. And we were all given the option to choose in-person or remote, and my son has not been given that option. I emailed Audrey Christensen last week and told her that he is now doing in-person at home because his teachers are at home. I don't see the point of him getting up in the morning, driving to school, sitting in a classroom, looking at a screen when his teacher is not there. He's doing AP Physics, AP Calc, American Honors, Aerospace Engineering, EDD, English, and these teachers need to be in class. He needs scores to go to college to do the engineering classes, and he needs a 1450 or higher on an SAT, and he's not going to achieve that right now. And unfortunately, it's the board's fault. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is the only comment we have for tonight. So next up on the agenda is the superintendent update.
Thank you, Mr. McNally. I just wanted to have an opportunity at this time to mention a couple of things. You may or may not know that today, January the 19th, is actually the first day of kindergarten enrollment for next year. We are asking families to enroll their kindergartners between January the 19th and March the 12th. All of the enrollment information is posted on the district website. We would just ask that families who are planning to enroll a kindergartner we would ask that they would go ahead and complete the registration process virtually so that we have that information for planning purposes. On the district website, you will find all of the information that you need, including the new student intake form, the kindergarten step-by-step guide to registration, the health and dental exam and immunization information, and contact information for all of the elementary schools if you have a question that you need to call your school, and then also information about full-day and half-day kindergarten. So we would just like to ask people to go ahead and start doing that, and we are doing it virtually this year for the first time, and we're hoping that will be a successful process for families, and we want to support you in that process. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your school or to the district office, and we'll get you connected with the right person. I just also wanted to mention that the deadline for submitting applications for the current school board vacancy is January 29th at 3 p.m. And I know that later today on your agenda, you're going to talk a little bit about the selection process. So that's my update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thurston. Next up is welcome celebrations, recognitions. Do we have anything?
No. No, we don't have any celebrations for this evening.
Okay, thank you. Then we will move right on to our items for discussion. First item up for discussion is the iReady MTSS update.
We have a recorded presentation to start.
Good evening. Tonight we are here to provide you with an update on the Innovative Learning Kindergarten to Grade 8 Achievement Goals. Good evening. Tonight we are here to provide you with an update on the Innovative Learning Kindergarten to Grade 8 Achievement Goals. I am Jennifer Phillips, the Director of Professional Learning, alongside Tina King, the Math and Science Teacher on Special Assignment. Tonight's presentation is aligned with Policy 6.15, School Accountability, and connected to the school board commitments regarding learning opportunities responsive to the whole child and the allocation of community resources to ensure growth, achievement, and social-emotional development, as well as the district strategic commitment to provide our students with innovative learning experiences that prepare them for post-secondary careers in higher education. I am going to provide you with an update on kindergarten to 8th grade district reading achievement goals using the iReady Winter Diagnostic Assessment results. Please make note and reference the supporting document for more disaggregated iReady data by building and grade level. The first reading goal I'm going to address is the district's attainment goal. To set this goal, we utilized our fall iReady diagnostic data and determined the current percent of students entering their grade level with some proficiency at or above their current grade level in one or more standard domains. By reviewing the data in this way, we were able to establish an end-of-the-year target assessing students on current grade level standards. The district's reading achievement goal is, By the end of May 2021, we will increase the number of students with proficiency of grade level reading standards from 43% to 72%, as indicated on the iReady Diagnostic Reading Assessment. Based on our winter iReady assessment results, we have increased from 43% to 60% of students demonstrating proficiency of grade level standards. With an increase of 17% at our midway point, we are on target to meet this goal by the end of the school year. Additionally, our iReady winter diagnostic data shows a decrease in the percent of students 2 or more grade levels below from 20% to 15%, and a decrease in students 1 grade level below from 35% to 25%. This graph looks at student attainment by building. The light red bar is the percent of students that demonstrated grade level proficiency on the fall diagnostic. The red bar is the percent of students with proficiency of grade level standards on the winter diagnostic, and the dark red bar is the end of the year goal. Schools' percent of students with some grade level proficiency at or above their current grade level in reading on their winter iReady diagnostic assessment ranged from 50% to 70%. All buildings except for 4 are on track to meet their end of the year goal. The second reading goal is the district's attainment goal by subgroup. By the end of May 2021, our goal is to increase the number of students by subgroup with proficiency of grade level reading standards as indicated on their iReady Diagnostic Reading Assessment. This chart illustrates the district's achievement goals by subgroups in the area of reading. The first column of this table identifies the subgroup. The second column states the percent of students with some proficiency at or above their current grade level on the fall iReady Diagnostic Assessment. The third column is the percent of students with grade level proficiency on the winter diagnostic assessment, and the fourth column is the district goal for grade level proficiency by the end of the year, which is to increase by half the number of students with grade level proficiency and grade level standards in that subgroup. For example, 25% of our students that are socially economically disadvantaged had some proficiency at or above their current grade level in the area of reading on the fall iReady Diagnostic Assessment. That percent increased to 40% on the winter assessment, and our end of the year goal is to increase to 60% by May 2021. The last reading goal is the district's growth goal. By the end of May 2021, our goal is for all students to meet their typical growth goal as indicated on the iReady assessment. Typical growth is the average annual growth for a student at their grade and placement level. Based on our iReady diagnostic assessment, our median percent of progress towards typical growth for the district is 73%. This means that half of our students have made more than 73% of progress towards their annual typical growth goal, and half of the students have made less than 73% of progress towards their typical growth goal. The mid-year goal for median growth is 50%. This chart represents median percent progress towards typical growth goals by school. The mid-year target is 50% median progress towards growth, which is represented by the red line. Our buildings range from 35 to 100% median growth. This chart represents median percent progress towards typical growth goals by racial subgroup. The mid-year target is 50% median progress towards growth. All of our racial subgroups have met their mid-year growth target, with white making the most growth of 74% and Hispanic making the least growth of 56%. This chart represents median percent progress towards typical growth goals by subgroup. All of the subgroups have met their mid-year growth targets, with males making the most median growth at 73%, and our socially economically disadvantaged students making the least median growth at 56%. Based on our winter iReady reading assessment, we have met our district end of the year, or our district's mid-year targets for overall growth and achievement, and all subgroups have met the median growth target. Based on our winter iReady reading assessment, we still have discrepancies among subgroups in both achievement and growth. To continue the work towards our achievement goals in the area of reading, we are taking the following district-wide action steps. All building instructional leadership teams will update their school improvement action steps in response to the winter iReady data. This will allow them to be responsive to student needs and make any necessary instructional shifts to impact growth and attainment. All students, kindergarten to 8th grade, will engage in instruction using their iReady personalized learning pathway to provide them with learning opportunities at their individual level. In addition, we are taking the following grade level action steps. In primary, kindergarten to second grade, we will implement the English language arts units of study and provide explicit instruction and feedback in phonics and vocabulary. In intermediate, grades 3rd to 5th, we will implement the ELA units of study and provide explicit instruction and feedback in comprehending informational text and vocabulary. And at the middle school, we will explicitly teach reading strategies to apply informational text and embed vocabulary instruction into fiction and nonfiction reading. Also at the middle school level, we are increasing student time in their iReady personalized learning pathway. Also, we have additional action steps to support students with IEPs and English learners, and they include the following. In the area of reading, our special education specialized programs have set improvement goals aligned to district and overall building goals. Students are engaged in their personalized learning pathways at the same rate as their general education peers. Additionally, specialized literacy programs are being utilized to increase identified needs and lessen learning gaps. For our English learners, remote tutoring is being provided for in-person and remote students. Books have been purchased for in-home reading in grades 6 through 12, and resources have been provided in Spanish for students and families learning remotely.
Now we will review the mid-year math learning data from the Winter iReady Diagnostic Assessment. We will look at math learning data from two perspectives, achievement and growth. The first goal is to increase the number of students with proficiency in grade level math standards from 34% to 67% as indicated on the iReady math assessment. This is our district attainment goal. Using our iReady diagnostic assessment, currently 54% of our students are demonstrating grade level proficiency. To reach our end year goal of 67% of students at or above grade level, our mid-year percentage should be 51%. We are at 54%. We are on track towards meeting this goal. We've also decreased the percentage of students below grade level. The second goal is to increase achievement for all subgroups. All subgroups have increased the numbers of students at or above grade level in math. While all subgroups have shown improvement, subgroups of students with IEPs, students learning English, Black students, Hispanic students, and socioeconomically disadvantaged students have not met mid-year achievement targets. Asian students are ahead of mid-year targets and have already met the end-of-year goal. White students and multiracial students are on track to meet the end-of-year achievement goals. This graph compares school improvement goals to mid-year progress utilizing the iReady diagnostic assessment results. There are 3 columns for each school. The first light pink column represents the number of students in fall at or above grade level. The second column represents the number of students in winter at or above grade level. And the last column represents the end-of-year school improvement goal. 11 out of 14 schools are on track to meet their end-year goals. The virtual school and both Thompson and Redling Middle School have not met their mid-year targets for achievement in math. The third goal states that all students will reach their annual typical growth by May. Typical growth is the average annual growth for a student at their grade and placement level. Our mid-year goal is a median of 50%. The median percent progress towards typical growth for the district is 57%. We are ahead of our mid-year growth goal. For the district as a whole, we are meeting growth goals in math. We can disaggregate the growth data for math by looking at groups of students by race. Asian students, multiracial students, and white students are meeting the mid-year median growth goal of 50%. Black students have a median growth of 28%, and Hispanic students have a median growth of 47%. English learners and socioeconomically disadvantaged students have not met the mid-year growth targets, while students with IEPs and gender subgroups have met mid-year growth targets. We can also look at student growth in math by school. Again, we're looking for that mid-year median goal of 50% progress towards typical annual growth. Almost all schools have met this goal. The virtual school and Thompson Middle School are below the median goal of 50%. Overall in math, we have met our mid-year district goals for achievement and growth. 12 out of 14 schools have met median growth goals in math. This is a celebration for students, teachers, parents, and the district as a whole, because our students are learning and growing despite challenging conditions. But when we disaggregate the data, we do have disparities in learning, in growth and achievement within subgroups. To meet our achievement goal in the area of math, we are taking the following action steps. We are building in buildings K through 8, instructional leadership teams are updating their school improvement action steps in response to the Winter iReady data. All students in grades kindergarten through 8 will be provided instruction in their iReady personalized pathways. By grade level, action steps will focus on specific domains for growth. In primary, we are focused on our work on number and operations, including fluency standards. In intermediate, we are focusing our work on multi-step problems, fraction operations, and fluency. In middle school, we are focusing our work on algebraic thinking, fluency standards for rational numbers, and solving equations. The middle schools will also increase the time students spend working on their personalized learning pathways. We also have specific action steps for students with IEPs in English language and students learning English language. For Strive, ASD, and OASIS, all students will be provided instruction at the same rate as general education peers. For Strive students, we're working on numeracy and multiplicative thinking assessments. For English learners, we are utilizing grant funds to provide remote tutoring support for in-person and remote learners. We're also providing students and families with resources in Spanish for remote learning. Thank you very much.
Are available to answer any questions that the board may have.
I know I saw some right about it, so, start. Okay.
Thank you. It was a good presentation. I appreciated the time that went into putting into it, and please thank all who have put it together for the work. Being an educator and doing other kinds of work that I do now, I could spend 4 hours going through all this data with you and asking tons of questions. That's not my role here. I'm a board member. So the way the questions I have are bigger, even though I'd love to sit and chat about data and how instruction is changing. So my big question is, as you look at the progress that we're making, and there's a lot of celebrations here to teachers and kids and families for all the work that they're going through, what kinds of supports do they need now mid-year? Are they getting the information and the resources? And I'm not talking about a new book or new activity off of the internet. I'm talking about real instructional support, changes in how we, do they have that? Do they have the feedback they need? Are they making their practice public in their PLCs? Are they able to do the kinds of things that they might have done more when the ISCs were working with them? And so are those things in place at all levels?
I'll give you an example just from today. We today started our mid-year cycles in terms of meeting with each site's instructional leadership team, the build teams that were mentioned in the presentation. Today was Redlings. And so we had administrators, teacher leaders, psychologists on the call. We went through a deep dive into Redlings data. They analyzed areas where they need to focus, and they finished their slides with very clear prioritized things that they said they need from district office. Some of that was more support in differentiated instruction. Some of it was more system-wide support for English language learners. So they definitely knew, it was evident that they had really analyzed the data thoughtfully at their site. They had made adjustments to their plan for the spring, and they had asked district office for some supports. So today was the first meeting that we had. We have all sites this week and next week. So again, Jen Phillips and myself and Jan and Mark are all listening in to almost all of them. And then we will be using their input to make adjustments to our professional learning for the spring and summer, and then also for any other kind of supports we could give to PLC teams this spring.
Is that happening also with the teachers who are virtual?
Yes, we are having that same process will be held with the virtual school, with the principal and their leadership team.
And is Mrs. Lichty still, is she part of that process with
Yes,
them? Okay.
absolutely. Thank you for asking.
Okay, because I am hoping that our leadership teams, historically, we tend to say we got a problem, so let's throw whatever we can at it instead of slowing down and looking carefully. So if leadership teams are in need of things that we here at the board should know, I think it would be best to know ahead of time. And also then what are we learning now that we should have in place in August for teachers when we will all be back together?
That's one of the things that I could do is which I would be doing anyhow, but I can share it with the board as a compilation of the trends I'm seeing and what different sites are asking for. At the end, I can provide that to you in a Friday update or at our next learning and teaching meeting.
That'd be great. My last question then is, you talked about increasing the personal pathway, I'm not saying.
Personal learning.
Personal learning at the middle school. How are you going to do that?
We have worked with the leadership to get a more clear plan on what that 45 minutes in reading and 45 minutes in math look like. And the teams have come together and decided that it's important for students to see that reading and math go across all disciplines. So one of the 20 to 25 minutes will come from English, one will come from social studies, one will come from math, and one will come from science. So they've divided the assignments in terms of the time that students are responsible for each class. And they have made a strong commitment to do that. I think it's a commitment to kids having that personalized learning, but it's also a commitment for reinforcing that English and reading and math are really ubiquitous across all subject areas.
And again, the remote kids would be part of that.
Same
process.
exact expectations.
All right, and I said that was my last question. I am concerned about the subgroups.
Yes.
And we know that an individual student could be in 3 or 4 different subgroups. So I'm assuming that the focus is also looking at individual kids.
Yes.
And making sure that we are not missing kids through the cracks. Because there are some groups here that it's not good.
Absolutely. And while the mid-year screener for SEL, social emotional learning, will be delivered this week and next week. So we didn't have that data, but all of the sites are ready once they get that data to make sure that they're triangulating that data. So growth and achievement in reading, in math, as well as any other indicators of needs for social emotional support.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple of concerns, I guess, to start specifically around the middle school performance, and I don't want to get that lost because we're lumping all the data together in K through 8. We have, one of our 2 middle schools, which under normal business as usual circumstances is about 2,000 students, give or take. Especially if I look at math, is not meeting. So is there a mechanism where the team can come back to the board before the end of the year to kind of as a checkpoint so that we can see how the middle schools are progressing in terms of meeting their targets?
I know that the middle school leadership teams would welcome the opportunity to present their action plans and to give the board more information. I think they want to partner with parents and with the board in closing the achievement gaps that we're seeing. So I could work with our chairs to see what might be a good time to invite the middle school in for a deeper dive into their scores.
And really, to me too, the more important, I am interested in that, but I also would like to see what results they've been able to achieve with what they've done. So I would leave that to you as far as what the appropriate timing is for that. The other question that I had really across math and the reading related to the iReady personalized pathway. So at what point does the teacher engage or what's the trigger for the teacher to know that having the computer pathway is just not working for the student?
There's different opportunities for teachers to see the progress in terms of which students might be growing pretty rapidly, which ones are getting stuck. And we have had trainings for teachers to understand what is expected growth, and then also how to reset a student in terms of maybe when they did the assessment earlier on, they assessed at higher than their real rate. We saw that with some parents helping some of their students, and then they were getting much more rigorous questions and challenging work than they were able to do. So teachers went in and made those adjustments. So teachers know what to look for on iReady, and they know how to make adjustments. What they're asking for is additional strategies from teaching and learning and from professional development to know how can I then make adjustments in my classroom instruction for the next week. And I do think that's part of what we've incorporated into the professional learning that will take place on Monday afternoons. So especially at the middle school, they have had professional learning time, but it's embedded throughout the week where they can't necessarily coordinate by grade level or by their subject area teams. So that is a very clear expectation of the work that teachers will be doing this every Monday from next Monday on out, is using both iReady data as well as common formative assessment data that they use in the classroom to make adjustments in their instruction.
Okay, that's very good. I did have one more. Related to the reading and embedding the teaching, the reading strategies and so forth, where is that going to happen? Will that happen across the subjects, English, social studies, or how will that actually be implemented?
I don't know the details of each of their implementation plan, but I know in general that when we're talking about reading strategies, it's typical to implement them across all content areas. As a former science teacher, I use both reading and writing strategies to help my students be more successful in the reading and the writing that they did. And I know that both principals would want it that way also.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had. Just the only final comment again, just to really emphasize the middle school portion, and especially as it relates to math, because we know we have opportunities at the high school level, and this is all like a waterfall, right? It starts in kindergarten all the way through. So I appreciate you emphasizing that.
Mr. Manheim, do you have anything? I'm just kind of going this way, so.
Okay. I don't want to duplicate what my colleague said, so I'm just going to stick to the disparities in the minority groups in particular, and just highlight again, I would like to see in the future, maybe the L&T meeting.
Get closer. Okay, thanks.
Sorry. At the next L&T meeting or subsequent, how we're going to, via action item, actually kind of tackle the disparities in the minority groups and the IEP and the EL. So because those disparities, specifically in the percentage, that one that you showed, are so unfortunately low, I'd like to see what are the action items that our groups in every elementary as well as middle school are going to tackle. And I just want to highlight that I think that this is exactly the data that shows that we have an equity issue that we need to address in the district. And so however we're going to address that, we need to do that quickly and create the program that's gonna do that. So I'm
It's
not,
very timely.
yeah,
This data
I'm not
is
saying
evidence.
exactly what, I'm just saying it's a very timely concern, and it's mirrored by the data that was shown today. We have students that have needs out there, and need our help as soon as possible. And so I know that teachers and families are working together to make sure that these students get the help they need, but it obviously isn't enough. And so as a board, as a board member, I'm speaking for myself, I just want to know what can we do, what can I do to make sure that I can provide more assistance for them. So to add on to what Mrs. McCabe said, what do we need to do? Is it a program? Is it, I forgot what else you said, but what else do we need to provide them to make sure that we're rolling in the spring and rolling in the fall? So it's just very clear on the equity issue, so. That was it.
Just right now, actually, just one quick question. So when we see the end of the year goals and everything, when would that be presented? Is that like June?
Yes, I think the window for assessment is the first 2 weeks in May, so where the learning and teaching meeting falls, I don't think we'll have it all analyzed and ready to present. So it would be at the June learning and teaching meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Parker? Do you have some?
I do not have any additional questions.
Okay. Well, I actually have, normally my questions are asked before it gets to me. That's why I wait till the end. Two questions. One was kind of a curiosity point. We had, early in the presentation, we talked about half are above and half are below 73%, with 50% being the median. What was the data for those? How many fell below that 50%? Obviously, a significant number were above it. Do we know how many? And I don't need the answer right this second. You may not be able to provide that at the moment.
Right. I can definitely follow up with you and get that specific question answered. I know it can be challenging when we're looking at both achievement and growth data. And the people who put the presentation together, Ms. Phillips and Ms. King, did an amazing job narrating and trying to make that really clear. But just in terms of, I think, the 73% is what our median growth was. So if you'd like to know the number of students on...
Well, I just was wondering how many fell below that 50%, which was the median, which was the goal.
Got it.
For that.
Okay, I can get that count
It's
for you.
really not, given that the shift was taken upward, it's just a curiosity for me.
Sure.
The other thing that I did have, though, it also addresses the subgroups, but I'm looking at it from a slightly different perspective. I'd like to know how our minority students are compared to other minority students in surrounding districts. But in addition to that, because that points to whether or not there's truly the issue, as great an issue as we might think. But I'd also like to know how they perform against students who are in primarily minority districts. That's, I think that will say something about what we're doing relative to what's being done elsewhere.
I know from doing some previous work in equity issues and trying to close the achievement gap, it can be helpful to look at some of the broad aggregate data, but again, you get into large student populations and it all sort of goes to the middle. One of the things that I found helpful in the past is to identify schools that do have a high minority population but are also having high achievement. They used to call them 90-90-90 schools, where it was 90% minority population, 90% free and reduced lunch, but 90% or more achievement. That's the districts I want to try and find and model and see what they're doing.
Well, right, and I guess that's kind of where I'm at, is how do we compare to districts that are, whether they're high achieving or lower achieving, I think we're gonna find some of both, I think.
Well, the challenges we're facing are definitely not unique to St. Charles. So we definitely will find other districts who are facing similar challenges, but they also are rolling up their sleeves just like we are, and they're doing their equity work, and they're making some adjustments to their curriculum and their services. And I see all of you being very supportive of that work, and I see the teachers being very open to that work too.
No, I have a particular interest in, that's the group that I work with.
Great.
So I I would be interested just to see, because there are things sometimes that are done, and we might find that we're doing something that's maybe going down the wrong path. And I want to make sure before we
Absolutely.
go down any path.
We have a lot to learn from other districts, so I would definitely welcome that opportunity.
Thank you. Any other additional comments? Okay. Sorry, hit the wrong button there. So next up is the high school first semester failure report with remediation options.
And again, this starts with a recorded presentation.
Hello, my name is Dr. Denise Herman, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer.
Hello, my name is Dr. Denise Herman, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer for District 303. Tonight, I'll be narrating the slides that's a summary of our Semester 1 failure report data for both East and North High Schools. First, we'll look at the data over the last 4 years. The first slide here with the blue background is for North High School. You'll see that in 2017-18, there was 121 Fs reported on report cards, whereas for this last 4, it increased up to 306. A similar increase was seen at East High School, although over the 3 years prior, they had a fairly consistent number of Fs around the upper 300s, but this last semester it did increase to 774 Fs. While this data is not where we would want it to be, we did see an amazing work being completed by teachers and students. This is a data level from November, December till January, where you'll see that at North High School, following the first quarter grade report, we had 1,277 Fs being reported. That was decreased to 1,092, and then by January, when grades were finalized, all the way down to 306. That was due to the enormous work and outreach by our teachers and our students to get their missing work completed, to get some of the makeup tests done if they had been absent or ill, and just to make sure that they became more proficient in the standards that were required to earn credit. You'll see that similar story taking place at East High School, where after first quarter in November, we had a high of 1,934 Fs being reported, down to 1,363, and then again, significantly decreased down to 774 by January. Again, I want to celebrate the hard work of the teachers and the students for making sure that what could have been a very significant issue in terms of the number of failures was reduced to a much more manageable level. Now I'd like to show the data by some of our ways of looking at who those students are. First is by grade level. Here you'll see that the grade level that earned the highest percent of Fs was the 9th graders at North High School, with the least percent being earned by the 12th graders. And I know many community members and board members were concerned about 12th graders potentially not earning graduation requirements, but we see many of them were able to complete the work they needed to earn credit. Here we see at East High School the percentage that was earned greatest was actually our juniors, who earned 32.3%. And the other the 10th graders actually were the least, with the other twos being pretty proportionate. The next way to look at the data is by gender. Here you'll see, although it was almost 54% and 46% at North, that's very proportionate. We do have more boys than girls at North High School, and so there was not any significant difference in the Fs that were earned by either gender group. Where at East, we do see that we have a very proportionate 50-50 split in terms of the population, but we have a disproportionate with males earning 58% of the Fs and females only 42% of the Fs. Next, we'll look at the demographics of our English language learners. Here you'll see that at North, they're 1.6% of the population, but yet earn 3.6% of the Fs, so slightly disproportional or overrepresented. And here you'll see that at East, the percent of the population is 3.2%, yet 5%, again, slightly disproportionate. The next subgroup is low socioeconomic status, or SES. Here you'll see at North that they're 8.5% of the population, yet that group received 32.4% of the Fs. Similarly, at East High School, they're almost 17% of the population, yet 49% of the Fs were students in this category. The next subgroup would be for students who have IEPs or 504s. And here you'll see that at North, the population of students with IEPs is about 12%, yet students with IEPs earned 28.4% of the Fs. 504s is also disproportionate, where they're 8.7% of the population, yet earned almost 15% of the Fs. East has a similar pattern, where the percent of population is 13.5%, and the percent of the Fs is 31. And for 504s, much more proportionate here at East, where it is 9.6% of the population and only 10% of the Fs. Next, we'll switch to ethnicity. Again, here looking for any disproportionates. In North High School, we'll see that the data is fairly consistent in terms of Hispanic being 10% of the population, but 9.4% of the Fs. African American being 1.3% of the population, but 3.3% of the Fs. Again, fairly aligned in terms of the breakdowns. When we look at East data, there's more disproportionality in terms of where we saw some subgroups earning substantially more Fs than other subgroups, particularly our Hispanic population. We have 15.3% of the population, yet they earn 40.8% of the Fs. This is definitely something that East High School is very aware of and will continually be working with their EL department and others to find more language supports for students. What about by courses? We wanted to make sure that we were looking not at just our subgroups, but also are there targeted courses that we should try and provide more intervention. Here at North is their top list of courses in which students received F: biology, culinary arts, geometry, English 9, Algebra 1, and modern American history. And you'll see the data there. Whereas a slightly different set of classes at East High School, where we had more electives. We have Autos 2, Autos 1, residential maintenance, film, anime, and news media, which is an English course you can choose to meet your English requirement, and American Studies, which is a combination of English and social studies requirements in the junior year. Again, you'll see that while North had slightly more core courses on the list, the courses at East, the auto and residential maintenance, definitely require as much hands-on work as possible. And so I know that we are definitely continuing to work to make sure students have the hands-on experience and have access to the equipment and materials needed to show proficiency in those standards. Next, I want to talk about our response. Both East and North High School staff are dedicated to continuing to lower the failure rate at both schools. A few different ways that we're approaching that. You'll see that the PLC teams at each school will continue to increase differentiation and support at the Tier 1 level. Many of you know we have our MTSS goal as a district, which talks about 3 levels. The first one being that core level of instruction at the classroom, the second tier being supplemental supports, and the third being very intensive supports. So when we see classes with higher failure rates, one of the first places that we look is into the core instruction and see what can we do to engage more students and to make sure that they have access to differentiated options in terms of maybe different problem sets or reading different novels or other things like that, where choice can be very helpful in making students connect with the curriculum and with the expectations. We also know that targeting support through the extended learning sessions will also be another opportunity to increase support for all students at the Tier 1 level. We also will be looking at Tier 2, which would be outside of the regular classroom instruction for credit recovery. Here, the options for students are to take a credit recovery course during the school day. The second option is to take it during night school through Northeast Academy. The third option at East High School is 9th hour. And then summer school, again, is one that sometimes is more convenient for some families. When we look at those options, we again are trying to make sure that we are doing everything possible to help as many students be successful in earning credit in the courses they need for graduation and for post-secondary work. So we are removing any grade level restrictions that may have been in place so that all students can have access to credit recovery options. We're also going to increase our use of the pre-assessments so that students do not have to retake concept skills in which they are already proficient. And we also plan to make summer school free for any student who needs to take that for credit recovery. So again, I want to thank the board for your attention, and myself and Principal Christensen and Principal Richter will be available to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
And I appreciate having the opportunity to answer your questions. And Ms. Christensen and Mr. Richter are in the hallway, so if there is anything that is more of a deeper dive into either of their schools, they are very prepared to answer your questions also.
Okay, well, we started there last time, so I think we'll start here this time. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns?
Okay, thank you, Mr. McNally. I want to thank Dr. Herman and our team. When this came up in the fall and I asked to see the numbers, it was out of concern for what was going on in the high schools. So I want to thank you for compiling it and bringing it to the board. I just want to say I know it's abysmal. It's very hard for us to digest it. I want to recognize, though, the hard work that you put into it. It's a lot to pull together, and recognize the celebration of the 3-month increase. When we first saw it in November, it was jarring. And so the celebration from November to December to January is something to be happy about. So I just want to say that first. That being said, now that we know that it was that substantial, there's certainly things I'd like to see different as we move forward. So some of the questions I have is kind of what is the action plan that we've set up to make sure we're not caught by surprise again. And these come out every week. And so what are we doing at the high schools to now kind of stay on top of the situation? I have several questions, sorry. So this is just the first one. I'm hoping that as you talk, it might answer some other ones.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that you are correct in knowing that we do have eligibility checks every Friday, and I think that data should be analyzed by the building's leadership team, if not every week, at least every other week, so that we are seeing increases in either any of our subgroups or by course, so that we could provide support to that PLC or any other group. So I do think that each of the sites building teams will be using this data to monitor very closely for second semester.
So this is something that we are going to be utilizing on a weekly basis. Okay, great. Do we think that the increased outcomes of the F reports are due to only COVID? Do we think there's any other influencers that have changed the increase from year to year? I mean, obviously it's gone up a little bit. Is it all due to the remote learning versus in-person? Is there anything else that we can attribute it to? Have we done any analysis like that? That's kind of a multi-tier question.
Right. I might ask Ms. Christensen or Mr. Richter, who's done a deeper dive into each of their data, if they want to come in and answer that specifically. But in general, about, what else besides remote instruction or COVID, I think that it's pretty intertwined, some of the variables. I think that one of the things that they looked at is we do have students who get behind and they start to go from a C to a D to an F, and it typically happens around October, November. And then a pattern is to, again, be made more aware of it and to work with the teacher on a plan. So unfortunately, we do see that pattern of success, then depth of despair, and then pulling things together to hopefully reach proficiency and earn the credit. I would need to take a deeper dive, and I actually think interviewing students would be a really good idea. I think the data gives us one dimension of thinking about what other components are contributing to them not being as successful as they would like.
And that might be more of a long-term question. I think that's a really good idea of some kind of focus group in the future to figure out how do we help 9th through 12th graders in particular kind of manage their workload. Speaking from a parent's perspective, I know that a lot of times we hear, oh, well, they have to get used to it for college, but they are still 14, 15, 16, 17. So I'm not sure how much of that balance goes on, just from a parent's perspective. There's your first focus group right there.
Ms. Weibel, can I just make one additional comment? I think we do see some patterns that emerge that are similar to what we've seen in the past. So for example, you noticed that freshmen, there were a higher number of freshmen, at least at one of our high schools, that had at least one F. That's a pattern that we've seen in the high school for several years now, which is one of the reasons why, at East in particular, they put the 9th hour program in second semester. It was to specifically provide an intervention for 9th grade students that were failing biology and algebra 1, which was our highest area or course for failures at the high school before. So I think that there is, to answer the question, was it because of COVID or not? I think there are some things that are probably COVID related, and it's really more about the disconnect with access to teachers and maybe some of the support structures that you would typically have in place, like when you pass them in the hall, you say, don't forget to turn that essay in tomorrow, or have you started on that? And I also think that our teachers were extending a little more grace maybe than they typically would have, so maybe they were giving students extended timelines to get work done, or they weren't recording it as an F, they were leaving it open, and that could also impact, depending on how you put that in your grade book, it can impact how that shows up on a DNF report. So I think it's a combination of all of those things. I will also say I think both high schools do have some pretty substantial structures in place to try to identify and support students that are struggling. And I think it would be good, if we do have Ms. Christensen or Mr. Richter just come and talk about what that looks like. Because one of the things that gets lost in the number is who is that student? Like, is it that they were doing great in all of their other classes, but they just are struggling in math because that's an area that they struggle? Or is this a student that shows up on the DNF report and actually they're failing everything? Right? Those are two different students and really need two different strategies for intervention. One might need some targeted academic support. Another one might need something that's more wraparound with counseling support or social worker or more intensive support, because there's something else going on. It's not just I'm struggling in one class, I'm struggling in everything. I'm struggling in school. And so I know the SST teams at the high school spend a lot of time talking about that. So I'm going to ask Ms. Christensen actually to come first to the mic so that she can talk a little bit about kind of what that looks like in a typical year and maybe how that's been impacted by COVID.
Before she died, I just wanted to kind of toss my own 2 cents in on this as well, because we're struggling with the same thing where I'm at. And I would say that COVID is not always necessarily responsible for it so much as it's exacerbated the trend. So whatever data we're seeing, and I was actually, that was rather, I was thinking the very thing you had just mentioned about one of the things that I think teachers are doing is probably giving a bit more grace and leeway in an environment that they figure, I'm not familiar with this environment, so the student isn't either. And so some of that stuff may be carried out farther. I know it did with me.
I think there's also the perspective, I know we're making a stand, sorry, that for certain students, the remote piece is very difficult and it's hard to navigate. And it's back to what I say about a 14, 15, 16-year-old might not be ready for a full remote college life, which is sadly what they had to all of a sudden deal with. So, sorry.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm not sure if it's the question about how we are supporting and
Yeah.
wrapping around students.
So it really it was kind of twofold. Like, the disparity that we're seeing is it related to kind of the crisis, or is it something that's kind of been a pattern that we've seen? But I think what I wanted you to talk about is kind of how do you monitor in a typical setting, student progress and students that might be at risk or that need additional supports?
Sure.
And so in a typical year versus have you done anything this year?
Sure. Well, in all times at both high schools, we have data teams or school or SST teams that meet weekly. And so to speak specifically for North, those teams are one dean, the counselor, and then also a social worker that's associated with that alpha group. And so those groups meet weekly. They look at the DNF report. So again, at both high schools, we do our grade checks every week, our IPR every week for all students. And so we have lists of students who are getting a D or an F that particular week. And it may be a fluke, it may be because there was an assignment that they missed or an assessment that they're gonna get some support on, and so they could be on the list for that reason. Or it could be a trend over time. And so the teams look at that. They have conversations not only together, but also with the teachers. A student can also not have a D or F and be put onto their discussion list as well if they are having some social emotional or some behavioral challenges in class. So that way the team can wrap around. In normal time, the deans would reach out or the counselor would reach out, depending on what relationship they have with the student or the social worker, to meet with the student to check in to see how are things going, what supports are needed, is there some tutoring, is there a strategy or a tool that they could use to help them find success. In our COVID times, that has been done virtually or over the phone. In the spring and throughout the fall semester, our deans have reached out, they've done site visits for students who are struggling, partnering with parents, having larger meetings with the parents and with the student and with the teachers to make sure that they're providing that support.
Can I keep firing questions? Okay. Sorry. I always want to call you Dr. Christensen.
Well, thank you.
I know I always upgrade you, sorry. This is Christensen.
Sue.
Yeah, I know, Sue. So the other concern, one of the other things I wanted to ask about was, as we went through the data, and again, thank you so much, Dr. Herman, is there are obviously some inequities and disparities between St. Charles North and St. Charles East. I'm not going to go through and talk about each one, but it does seem that there is some work we need to do to kind of make the playing field a little more level. So I'm not sure in which capacity you guys want to talk about that, or if there's going to be a plan for that, or if Dr. Herman wants to address that.
I think one of the things when we talk about a level playing field for students, I think their achievement as assessed by grades is one way that I would want to use that to talk about the level playing field, but it also needs to be compared to the demographics and enrollment in general, because different student subgroups are bringing, because we know from their K-8 achievement, they're bringing gaps in their performance with them to high school. So just how you saw previously, the gaps in some of our subgroups K-8 that continues, and unfortunately, in some areas is growing at the high school level. So when I talk about a level playing field, because we have different distributions of groups at our two high schools, we're going to see different levels of achievement. And so I don't want to have that be anything about the staff or the students or anything like that. It is a reality. So because of the populations, there might be more intense services with our EL, because that's such a large population at St. Charles East, where we might emphasize what's still providing those services, but maybe the larger gap was in students with IEPs at North High School. And I'm just picking that as two areas that stood out to me. That's the conversation that we're going to be having, I believe it's Friday, in both East and North, to talk about how is this data informing your school improvement plan.
And this might actually be for Dr. Pearson. The more data you bring us and bring the future boards, the more information it brings Dr. Pearson as to future decisions he might have to propose to the next board as to what, if anything, they want to do with geographic population and things like that. I know that was something we talked about 4 to 6 years ago. And I don't want to get into that discussion tonight, but yeah, the other piece of that obviously is, again, the inequities with ethnicity, IEP, and EL goes back to our equity work, and again, just showing the disparity that's there. So I don't want to keep drilling that point, but that's really important. 2 other pieces, and then I'm done. I was just gonna give some feedback regarding the summer school, and as a parent that worked with summer school, I think I appreciate that you're gonna offer it to people for no tuition. Just make sure you have the support for staff, especially if you're talking to a DEF student who has to retake it. There has to be staff support for some of those classes. I know in some schools sometimes it's more self-guided, and so that might be challenging. And then the other thing I had was, and again, this is more to Dr. Pearson, and I just want to say that I was a parent of a student who was in this number in November. Many of these numbers were in November. And it was a challenge to remote learn and then have to bring all those grades up. And we partnered with the school, and the teachers, the administration at East, has been very, very helpful in partnering with them. So they do a great job in helping your student get to where they need to be, despite whatever they're trying to overcome and whatever demographic they're in. So it is challenging though. The other piece was, this is a thought, and I don't know, propose it to Dr. Pearson and he can bring it back to the board at whatever time, is right now we have some of our classes that are not fully attended. So most of our classes at North probably hold like 12 people, would you say?
Yeah, 12 to 15.
12 to 15. And so I know at East and probably at North, they're not fully at capacity. So I don't know how it would work, because I don't know how you would fill them every class period. But it might be an opportunity to look at that student population and invite them in for more days a week, or look at an IEP student population or a minority student population and invite them in for those 5 days a week to help with their grades if there's a spot for them in that classroom. There are other districts doing that. The machinating of it is incredibly complicated, which is why I'm leaving it to you to discuss. But that's just a thought that is going on out there as well. So it just gives more opportunities for kids to help learn. So I think that's the last
I was just going to say, while we've got them here, before, if there's anybody else that had anything they'd like them to address.
Could you invite Mr. Rector in?
She was right there. I do have some questions, and I don't know who would be the best person to answer it. I do feel like maybe it might be principals. One of the big pieces that you have as a response is the extended learning sessions. I'm just wondering how many students attended this first day of periods 2 and 4 at each high school.
I know for us, we didn't have, at lunchtime, we had 5 students in the Commons. We did have some students who did return. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head because our program doesn't differentiate students who are reporting to those extended learning sessions in person versus those who might be attending them from a virtual standpoint. So I don't have that exact number or figure with me today, but that's something I can obviously ask one of our assistant principals to get and provide to you guys.
What about it?
At North, again, we don't have the data as to who was in the building and who wasn't. We had 7 students in the cafeteria for lunch today during that time. And then we had between 240 and 250, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number, students that were planning to or were invited to participate with teachers today.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Do we have a way to identify who is in the building in person versus not? I can tell you anecdotally, there was at least one session today where there was one student. So I think that could be one of our next challenges. And how do we garner more in-person instruction during the extended learning time, if that's our objective?
Sure. And that's something that Mr. Richter and I, along with our teams, have been working on with this system. How can we set up additional events, some for virtual only, and some in person only, so it'll be easier for us to navigate the system and get that data.
Okay.
So I think, my point to that was, one of my children were one of the 5 that were in your building, so that's how I kind of knew the numbers may not be where we need them to be to actually make the impact we want it to make. So, just in the thinking, I know you guys are meeting Friday and there's more to come, that may need to be, the advertisement needs to go out, from the teacher. Personal invitation works very well usually. The other thing I wanted to ask is, this is the Fs, and we have these responses about how to fix the actual credit loss. But what about, I have a couple facets of this question. What about the Ds? The D's kind of disappeared off of here. And then will kids, if they fail 1 quarter, be able to take a quarter's worth to be able to repair their grade per se? I know we heard from a lot of families where they had a student that's typically an A, B student who was in that range of barely making it, getting low C's, D's, F's. So, and if they didn't get the F, if they eked out the D, and they're worse off actually, because they can't do their credit recovery and fix their GPA. So I'm just wondering, what's the plan, or have we thought about that with those guys yet?
So at this point, we haven't gone down that path to think about how to rectify some of the Ds. We know that our first priority is making sure that our students are maintaining their course towards earning the credits they need to graduate, and so that's been the focus of our work so far. I don't necessarily believe it's something that's out of the question, but I do know that in addition to having a challenge to manage the current coursework, to also look back on previous coursework, you may run into the opportunity where students are then having to juggle too much, and then now their current coursework is also suffering. So I think that's just one of the things that we have to consider as we think about what our plan might be related to addressing Ds.
I think there's also 2 ways to look at that in terms of opportunities for students to show proficiency at a later date that could improve their grade versus opportunities to go deeper into their learning, and how and when does that happen. And knowing that many of our courses are year-long courses rather than just semester. Some of them are just semester, but many of them will have an opportunity if there was a learning gap from semester 1 to, again, most of our curriculums do spiral in terms of having an opportunity to come back and see that math formula again, or take another stab at analyzing a data set a certain way in a science class. So I know that the PLCs will be talking about ways that they can close some of those patterns that they might be seeing and where students really fell short.
Yeah, that could be something that's on the table to look at those students who may by choice want to improve, whether it's a quarter's worth of grade or something, rather than just redoing all of the assignments. Is there some other way we can make some of those improvements?
Well, we do only record semester grades. So the quarter grades are more progress reports to parents, but our transcripts only have grades that are reported to colleges for the semester.
But if you had a B and then you got a D, now you're at a D, you could pull you all the way to a D. That's the concern I have, is that 1 quarter does make an impact. So how can we just improve the semester grade? I do have another high school question. I can wait until after we're done with and talk about anything else.
So do you have any more questions for the principals, I guess?
No.
I just didn't want to keep them standing there while we discuss all kinds of other things. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to address with the principals?
Well, I have more questions, I just don't know who's the appropriate person.
Can they stay?
Yeah.
Let's just keep moving.
Do you mind if I really quickly talk about the Ds? Also, at any time in any year, whether or not we're having a pandemic, teachers do have the opportunity to work with students to do grade changes. So many of our students who have Fs and some of them that have Ds, there are kind of plans that the teachers have worked with the parent and with the student so that they can demonstrate mastery or proficiency or competency of the skills or the standards that can have an impact, a positive impact on their overall semester grade. So that's something that the teacher and the family would be working on, and then the teacher would take that to the registrar for that change.
If I can comment, that's, again, something we're facing. And the one problem that does occur with that is if that becomes a lot of students, it becomes onerous on a teacher. Because now, not only does that, you're talking about the student having to juggle that extra course, you're also talking about a teacher having to juggle extra work and extra time spent on material that they're not actually covering at that time with the rest of the students. If it's 1 or 2 students, it's generally not a problem. But when it becomes a wholesale kind of a mandated issue, I will also tell you that would become a big union issue as well.
Well, but it sounds like they're already doing it, right? This is a process that you already have in place.
Right, and it sounds like it's something though that the teachers themselves are able to do, but I don't believe there's any mandate. And I guess that's what I'm saying, we have to be cautious about how we approach that, because once it becomes, where there's something that we're mandated, it can become a wholesale thing. And now you're essentially asking teachers to do double work. And I can tell you from experience that can end up resulting in friction between faculty and administration. So, again, on a case-by-case basis, it's one thing, but wholesale, it would be a very different animal.
I think one of the things that we could do that many other districts have done when they look at the equity issue is have it permeate multiple strands. So it's not just achievement, but there are some equity policies and practices that do have some inequities built into them. And so that actually could be one of them, where if I have 2 students who both have a D, and one of them has a teacher who does allow a plan to be put in place and make up work, and another student doesn't have a teacher who does that, they end up having a very different record of their learning. And so during a pandemic year is not the time to change grading practices, but it is the time for us to notice things that we know when teachers have the think time to come back to it and have some of those expectations. So I would want us to ensure that grading and assessment practices were one of the things we examined through an equity lens.
My last question, I'm not sure, where this answer will come from. But I know we heard from Ms. Freeland tonight, and we've heard from other families recently about in-person learners with teachers that are at home. And I know that there were attempts that were made to make changes and switches to avoid this if at all possible. However, there's obviously some more specialized classes where this may not have been a possibility. I actually, as a parent, had a similar conversation with an administrator today regarding this very topic. What can we do to better support classes or courses that have teachers that are at home that may have more intense learning expectations, your AP, your honors, your specialized programs, some of those more intense classes, lab sciences, where the monitors or supervisors may not have any specialty or understanding of that subject or department area. Is there a thought about that, or is there something on the table that you're looking at?
So I think, as we spoke about today, I think one of the big issues is that we do have a handful of teachers who are fully remote, and there are some room supervisors who are there who may not be from that content area. We tried as much as we possibly can to provide that support. But by definition, the supervisory periods for teachers are, in fact, they are supervisory and non-instructional. If we were to look at trying to find opportunities for teachers to support in additional ways, I think that's something that we would have to think about allocating different kinds of resources towards. But I do know that our PLCs do work a lot together, and oftentimes we've embraced this idea that every student is our student and we are every kid's teacher. And in some cases, we do have some cross sort of pollination of opportunities to provide support to students, and I expect to see that happening more so as we continue on this semester. But at this point, for example, if there's a particular AP teacher who happens to be out, who's not in person, and we may not have a person who can substitute in and provide that level of support. So I know as we talked about it today, that idea kind of crossed my mind, and I'm certainly open to finding ways that we could possibly do that. But at this point, from a structural standpoint, we don't have the structures to be able to support that as of right now.
The other thing that I would add, just to build on that, again, talking about how the pandemic has revealed some of the things rather than being the cause. It's revealed that it's very difficult to have only one teacher be teaching multiple sections of the course. So looking for the two of them who will be building their master schedules for next year, I would look at it where it's not healthy for any system for one teacher to be teaching all the sections of AP. They need a partner. And if more of our teaching assignments had 2 or 3 people teaching the AP classes where there's multiple sections, it would be that in-person person who could do some of that kind of work. So I think we're learning about things that maybe were sort of under the radar, that this challenge is making it more apparent. So I know that we don't want teachers teaching 5 different things for 5 classes, but I also think that it can be sometimes a tradition where a certain teacher just gets certain kinds of courses, and I want to value their expertise, but we also need to invest in collaboration and interdependence. And so I want us to learn that lesson and to charge the principals with making sure that we have very balanced, that every teacher is working with, very academically talented students and also learning with students who need a lot more support and care.
Thank you.
The first question I had, do we know the actual number of students that equate to the 306 Fs, for example?
Yes, we do. I don't know if I have that number available or if Ms. Christensen does, but we can get that to you.
Okay, for both, for East
For
and
both.
North. Because I just, to Dr. Pearson's point, while all of it's concerning, it can paint a different picture when you have a group of students that have a lot of Fs compared to a group that maybe has 1. And then, so the eligibility checks, we are still doing that on a weekly basis, even though we're not doing the sports or whatever. Okay. And then the other question I had, I wasn't following around our response to practice, the removing grade level restrictions, what that meant.
From what I recall of our conversations, previously there had been some restrictions where 9th grade students couldn't enroll in credit recovery courses until their 10th grade. And the three of us talked about how research is not showing that to be really best practice, that you want to early intervene, and that students, we want to do everything we can to try and have all students be on track to graduation in terms of credit attainment. So that would be an example of one of the barriers that we removed. So we will have opportunities for freshmen. Again, it's not a must do, but we removed that, and families will have the option to participate in credit recovery. I also want to reinforce what one of the board members talked about, needing that adult support. So in the credit recovery and in summer school, you don't take a student who's had challenge learning a certain course and then put them in front of a computer in isolation to continue to try and reteach themselves. There has to be different modalities that go on. There has to be different ways of exploring the content that are different from the first time. So we are very supportive of our teachers who supervise the credit recovery, being very active supporters of student learning, and the same thing in summer school.
Did we offer no tuition or no cost for summer school last summer?
No, it's actually something that we decided to do for this year,
Okay.
and we've asked our team to work on that. So this is the first year that we would be offering that.
With regard to that, and that is only for credit recovery, that's not for somebody who wishes to advance.
I think we will still have coursework and opportunity for the acceleration, but that would not be for free.
That would be tuition based though.
Okay. And then final question and then a comment. When do you think would be the appropriate time that you would be able to come back to the board and give an update in terms of how we're looking for second semester, and in particular related to our graduating students who might be on the cusp, and so we can understand what that looks like?
Well, later on, you see our upcoming agenda. We do have one of the things when we did our presentation to the board in September, that we were going to come back and present information on the learning gaps, the work that was done by the PLCs, to talk about what were the things that were maybe not learned or mastered in fourth quarter, and where were they going to fit. And some of those things were first quarter, but some were going to be second or third quarter. So we do have a plan in February to bring updated information on the PLC work. We also have our data from the SAT. So similar to how we had iReady data for the K-8, we will now have not just grades, but we'll have another layer of information to look at student achievement at the high school level also in February. In terms of beyond that, I might want to give you those two pieces of information first, and then maybe after, at the end of the February meeting, we can talk about what would be the next appropriate timeline to give you an update.
Well, and maybe just to clarify further, what I'm really trying to hone in on, especially since this is a unique year, is the March timeframe appropriate to understand how many students, especially seniors, are still trending at an F in required courses? And so we have, do we have a larger number that are at risk of not graduating?
Well, I know our school counselors are on top of it when it comes to monitoring seniors who might be credit deficient. So I don't know if one of you want to maybe make a suggestion. Is this something that we could include in our presentation, or could we include it as information in a Friday update? Because we will be tracking that throughout the whole semester in terms of seniors who are D's or F's, or attendance-wise, or other kinds of things are showing signs of not being engaged in their learning.
For me, I think it would depend. If you saw that this year was trending very adverse to how we were historically, then I would think that would be worthy of more of a board discussion versus an update.
Okay. I'll let Ms. Christensen maybe comment on some of the things that we already have in place to monitor senior progress.
Well, as you said, we do have our counselors that are monitoring that on a weekly basis. Our data teams are continuing also to meet and to monitor that. In terms of us as systems and as schools looking at how are the D's and the F's breaking out by grade level, by all of the different demographics that you saw this evening, that's something that both schools will be continuing and starting pretty soon. And I say pretty soon, and that's super definitive. But I say that just because as we start a second semester, there are many classes that seniors take that are semester-based. And so there's that period of foundational learning before they have summatives and before they have grades to demonstrate, are they struggling with their skills or are they struggling with the standards? And so waiting perhaps until March, that might be a good time because that foundation will have been laid and we will have been monitoring that along the way. And so we'll be able to share that information at that time as well as where we are at that particular moment in time.
Okay, that sounds good to me. And then just the last thing is, I know that you and the team are, I think, consistently looking for opportunities to increase the number or the opportunities for students to be in school, in person and so forth. Definitely this would be a group, but then I would just ask us from an equity standpoint to continue also looking at those advanced classes where students, physics, for example, they haven't been able to do some of their labs and things like that, or, the comment that was made earlier. And it's a tough prioritization, but I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you very much. Can I clarify something on Mrs. Fairgrave's comment before you start, Ms. McCabe? Am I understanding this right in the data? So for instance, there's a slide 3, it says semester 1F. Would that give us, I'm just looking at east, but the second slide is north. Would that give us the number of students, because it would be 1, or would that not necessarily?
No, and I'm sorry, we didn't include that slide. I know that you have it broken down and we can get it to you.
Okay,
right
so
away.
I'm not making the presumption that just because there's 1 F, it's
No, it's
means
actually,
1 student.
of those Fs on report cards, there might be 2 on this student and 4 on another student and 1 on another
Okay,
student. Correct.
but there's one slide that says 1F. It's data and it says that they have 1F, so wouldn't that mean that's?
Which one is that, Ms. Webb?
Slides 2 and 3, it says 1F. So isn't that the slide that would be representative students, or am I misreading that? Sorry, it just disappeared, but it's in your supplemental, sorry. But it's the one that you showed.
I looked at that as semester 1,
Yes.
like first semester.
I'm thinking 1F for first.
Oh,
Because, never mind. I got you.
On that.
Thank you, I just wanted to clarify if I was misinterpreting, and I was, so thank you.
Semester 1, not 1F, yeah.
Okay.
On that note, 375 Fs can be anywhere from 50 to 375 students.
Right.
And it's obviously falling somewhere in between there.
I meant it as 1.
But it would require, I think as Dr. Pearson had said, it would require vastly different intervention. And there's going to be interventions across the board. So that was something that was kind of a note that I had made that the problem can be anywhere from very deep to very widespread. And if it's, frankly, if it's widespread in some ways, it's almost better just because it's probably more easily remediated in some ways. I'll wait because I know Mrs. McCabe, you have some questions. I have some other things
Sorry.
as well. So.
Thank you for all the work you do. High school is so complex. Elementary, if you did a little more elementary, it would be so less. I got like 3 biggies here. First of all, I had never seen this kind of DNF report, so I'm kind of curious as to what it, and you have answered it in multiple ways, but I think I'd like to tie it together. What is this, what did you learn that was an aha? What are you going to take for next year? And what did it tell you about instruction?
I might ask the principals to start, and we'll go with Mr. Berkshire first, and then I will close with my ahas.
And Ms. McKay, could you please repeat those, so I can make sure I can answer them fully? I just want to make sure.
So what did you find out that was kind of, an aha? What are you going to take for next year? So what did you learn that you're going to, okay, we're going to change our practice for next year. And then what did it tell you about instruction?
So I think the big aha that I had is that, as we sort of alluded to, we do have the number of Fs in and of itself does not tell the entire story. And I think that as we looked across the students and I poured through the data and tried to figure out how to make it presentable tonight, I think to me the big aha is that every piece of data tells a story. And I think moving forward and carrying that on, I think the more that we can invest in that story for each individual student, the more we're going to be able to really adequately help them be more successful. And so, for me, as I think about our MTSS structures and our recommitment to making sure that we've got better systems in place, I think for me, it's that sort of mindset and that sort of work, which is already reflected in the teams, which we've already altered for this year to be more in alignment with where we're going as a district, as Ms. Christensen has said. Looking at, for example, just one dean, one school counselor, and one social worker, having that small mini team to really figure out what the story is, and then to bring in more individuals that can help based on what that story is, as opposed to having 12 to 15 individuals sit around a table and maybe not be as efficient with their time. So I think for me moving forward, it's really getting a little bit more of a in-depth look at what that student story is. And really, rather than look at it in mass, try to boil it down to the individual, because ultimately, we can provide interventions and supports for groups of students, but ultimately it's going to require us to get down to the individual level to be able to understand what it's going to really take to help make that student be successful. And like I said, in some cases, it's there are family issues which are some of those barriers. And for example, we've helped some families and students with supporting them with hotspots. And it could be as simple as that, or it could be something a little bit more complex. But I think ultimately that's my big takeaway, my big aha, and really moving forward, that's my call to action related to this information.
Similar, I think it's really reinforced the value and the importance and the impact that relationships have. And when I'm talking about relationships, I am talking about teacher to student, but I am also talking about partnerships with parents. Because one of the things that this pandemic has caused is the need to really branch out and to make sure that we're making stronger relationships and having stronger, more targeted conversations and supportive conversations. Someone used the word grace earlier. How are we extending grace, giving grace, taking grace, all the way around? And so I think that's something that has demonstrated. I had a student that I was chatting with a few weeks ago, and they talked about the reason that they were going to do all the work that they hadn't necessarily completed in advance and demonstrate their skills was because they knew that their teacher cared. They knew that their teacher was behind them on their team supporting them, and they had that reinforcement at home with their family. So I think that's a huge thing. I think we did know that relationships were important, but really the value that brings was really brought to light. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed is the conversations with colleagues, with staff members, with teachers from different content areas about the value or the importance or the role of a standard and the essential skills, and really looking at that and measuring and monitoring and assessing that and providing feedback on that. And I think that's something that, whether we're in COVID or not, those are really powerful conversations to continue to have, not only just to have now, but also to have an impact on our curriculum development, on our assessment, and on our communication. Did I answer your questions?
And then I'll just add, maybe across both schools in the district, some of the ahas. One of the things that is reinforced for me was the inequities that we're seeing, and how it was from, especially tonight, thinking about all the data we've presented from kindergarten to middle school to high school, Our English language learners really need a lot of different kinds of support from what we're doing. In terms of learning, I think one of the things that, to me, as a classroom teacher and as a principal, I always tried to help kids not dig a hole that they couldn't get out of. And I think that it goes a little bit to what you were saying before about they're not in college yet. And so when I think about learning to learn skills, and especially the freshmen at North had the highest rate, what learning to learn skills are we teaching them? And so that's for me. It always has been a challenge, but COVID again magnified the challenge of some students have those self-directed learner skills, and some students need us to give them more feedback and more direction on how to grow those. And then finally, in terms of instruction, I think that one of the things that I've learned is we still have a disconnect in the way we instruct, which I think we're seeing very good adjustments trying to target essential skills and concepts. But the way we give kids and parents feedback is not by skill or standard, it's by assignment. So if I'm a student and I'm at home and I'm getting a D, it can be difficult for me, based on how we record learning, to know what do I need to do differently. If for example, in a science class, was it the fact that I didn't understand how to make charts and graphs and data? Or was it that I wasn't doing very good data analysis and writing conclusions? Or was I not able to do math effectively to solve balanced equations? Right now, we're not able to give students that kind of feedback. And I think it goes to what Dr. Pearson was saying. Sometimes in the classroom, you can let a kid know that, oh, you got an 8 out of 10 on this quiz. Well, what does 8 out of 10 mean? Right now, unfortunately, I don't think that we've been able to do as much interpreting for students and parents of the data we are collecting. And it's just magnified some of the challenges that students have had. So one of the things that I hope, again, going back to that, what can we learn, or what things we want to have our equity team look at when I think about equity and grading, I do think that the idea of making sure the feedback that we're giving students is very clearly aligned to the essential knowledge and skills that we've identified. And however we can support teachers in making that transition, I think in the long run, it will help some of the students who don't have that skill already to gain it. And I think that's a lifelong skill that they all need.
That to me is huge. So thank you for that, because feedback is critical for learning, and the way we have traditionally done it doesn't give it. So thank you for saying that. So that kind of ties into my other piece. We used to say when we had AYP and a building didn't make it, it was the 5th grade fault because the 5th graders didn't perform. And it's not, it's a K-5. It's nobody's fault, but it's a K-5 issue. So it was, somebody along the way said the gaps don't come just because they've turned 14 and are 9th graders. They have come along. We have done our curriculum pre-K to 12th grade. I hope we will continue to articulate that and not just do K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12. Because we are a unit district, I think any district that has 5 or 6 feeder elementary districts can talk about how that looks. So I'm hoping that what you've learned about the gaps and the patterns you're seeing is something that it can be communicated and articulated all the way through. Kindergarten teachers very rarely talk to any high school teacher about what they're doing. 5th grade teachers once may talk to 6th grade counselors. That articulation may need to be unpacked, both for equity reasons for achievement reasons, for feedback reasons, are we really articulating it? I don't know that now, so somewhere along the line, that to me is a critical piece. That's not really a question, it's more of a statement.
Well, I think a response, and it will be a pleasure to share this with all of you next month on our February agenda, is an overview or updated CDT process, the curriculum development team process, and it is reflecting many of the things that I'm talking about now. So I think you're going to be very pleased to see K-12 teams. You're going to be pleased to see both formative and summative assessments embedded in the curriculum, very targeted professional learning. So yeah, we're very excited to share some of those things because it has to be system-wide changes. This work is too hard for every individual teacher and every individual classroom to be trying to figure it out themselves. So the CDT process has to embrace many of the things we're talking about.
And I think teachers count on the district. If you're telling me this is the curriculum, then I need to know, I need to be assured that this is moving a kid forward, that I'm not just doing first grade work, but this is gonna be the foundation for what they're gonna do when they graduate. So, okay, that's another conversation. My last piece is about the hidden rules. And I know I've said it, I don't know if anybody's heard me say it. I get really concerned that high school experience begins the second semester of 8th grade. That it isn't something that families, they may move here because of our high schools. Most people are looking, I'm gonna buy a house, I'll be here for 25 years, I want my kids to have the best high school experience. I get concerned that families don't know what's coming up as they think about what do my kids need to do in middle school, what do my kids need to be ready for in 5th grade and 3rd grade. And it isn't just to say high school only, but I don't think we have that conversation with families enough for them to be prepared for when that second semester of 8th grade comes and life is going to be a little different next year. So those hidden rules are part of, I think, the hope I hope we do when we start looking at equity, because that's across the whole board. If you have had a kid who's gone to high school, you may know a ton more than somebody who's doing it the first time. If you feel disenfranchised from our school district versus somebody who knows how the whole system works, we have kids who don't have the same tools walking in for advocacy.
I know both high schools had their future freshman nights last week, but I think you're right. How can we collect data on which families attended and break that down by subgroup and say who else do we now need to reach out to in terms of who wasn't there and what can we do to help them feel welcome and a part of the East and North families.
I would agree, and I would piggyback onto that, post-high school careers, any kind of CCR, regardless of what it looks like, whether it's college or trades or what have you. I think that is, again, a topic for another day, but I think that in the reflection of equity, I think that is all over the board. And the people that utilize what we do provide is certainly not even close to 100%.
Thank you very much for all your time and all the work you do for our kids. Appreciate it a lot.
And I thank you. I felt terrified sitting here comfortably myself watching you guys stand. I feel awful. So I just had really one or two quick things. I do have a concern, honestly, about the concept of giving free summer school to students who are remediating, but students who want to advance themselves. I think it kind of disincentivizes the advancement or places a lower value on advancement. That's my own view. So, and I understand the reasoning behind it, but I think that there's the other side of that needs to be looked at. And the other thing is, I'll just again reiterate that I would like to see a comparison of our subgroups with subgroups in a typical school, both surrounding schools, similar demographically to us, and a typical school with minority demographics, with those subgroup demographics. Because I know they all kind of meet in the middle, but that's what I want to take a look at, because we can certainly compare ourselves to the top of those, and we can compare ourselves to the bottom of those. That's not going to give us real information. Comparing ourselves to typical is what I like to see, because that helps guide us to know what do we really have to do. Is the issue of equity as large as we think? Is it larger than we think? And the only way to know that is to do a comparison outside the district, which we talked about doing before. So I think we can look at an insulated view and say, well, there are disparities, but there are going to be disparities, and there have been disparities in, however you want to break up subgroups, there have been disparities, and a disparity in outcome does not always mean a disparity in opportunity. And I even say that regarding the two high schools. The outcomes are not always the same, but that doesn't mean the opportunities aren't the same, because as you had mentioned, there are different demographics at the schools. So.
Well, I do think that, you bring up an interesting point with the opportunity gap. And I think that that's one thing that we will definitely, we're leaving no stone unturned when it comes to seeing, do all kids have equal access to some of these opportunities, to some of these supports. But I am a person who believes that all of our students can learn and achieve at high levels. So I think that, and that's what our mission statement says. And so I do think that one of our responsibilities is to do whatever we can to try and close those gaps. And so we look forward to having that conversation about equity and about some of our goals and what our equity plan should embrace when we meet next month in February.
Let me clarify, I agree with that. That's I guess my point is that you can be going in the right direction, and somebody says, hey, I noticed something, you might want to turn around, and you realize you just turned around and you're losing ground now. And I don't want to do that. And so if we're on the right path, if maybe it takes some tweaks, things like that, that's one thing. But I want to be very cautious about not making wholesale changes, because, again, for 30 years of doing this, I've seen it become disastrous. And I guess we're done with that topic, unless anybody has more to add. Okay. Then on to item C, which is school board member vacancy. It has been 2 hours. Did you guys want to take a quick break? I think we can take a few minutes here before we okay.
It should be relatively.
Okay. Then let's plow through. I'm good with it.
Can we take over? All right. So, as you all know, Mr. Bryant resigned. So, when he resigned, it started our 60-day window to fill his vacancy. So, the next day, we put on the website the application process and the applications. And as Dr. Pearson mentioned, beginning January 29th at 3 p.m. is our deadline. So that takes us to our next kind of milestone in filling this vacancy, which would be the February 8th board meeting. After that, in closed session, when we adjourn, we can discuss the candidates we'd like to interview. I'm sorry, I kind of jumped in between. So in between there, administration will send us the list of applicants. I'm not sure if it'll be on the 29th or it might be that Monday. Kind of all depends on how many come in the last hour, so it will be 3 o'clock. So it might be Monday before we receive this, but all board members will receive everyone that's applied and is qualified. And then you guys can review them for the next week. So then we'll come to the February 8th board meeting where in closed session we can discuss the candidates and determine how many we would like to move forward in interview. Then, on February 22nd, after business services, we will interview those applicants, and we can decide tonight whether we'd like to do that open or closed session. And then we would adjourn after that. So this would be a special board meeting following business services. And then we can go into closed session and discuss the appointment, who we would like to move forward in appointing or nominating, that we would take action on. And that would take place on March 8th, where we would see the new board member. So what else did I forget? In your packets, there are questions. Some of them are from the ISAB website. And then I believe the last sheet is the questions we used last. Is that the one we used last time? Yes. So some of us were around for that one 2 years ago when we filled Mr. Gaffney's seat. So those are the ones we did it. Just kind of for refresher, we did do that in open session, and we did it as a panel style. And we each took turns asking a question of the candidate and kind of mixed it up a little bit. So if I ask question 1 to community member A, community member B, Ms. Weibel would ask question 1. We would go around kind of our circle like we did last time. So that's kind of the timeline. Does anyone have questions on the timeline first? No? Okay. Then, is everyone good with doing interviews open session? Okay. All right, so that's easy. So we're doing good so far. So then I would just kind of ask us to, over the next week or so, reflect on the questions. I guess let's kind of start with the 6 that we did last time as a starting point. And then, I'm not sure if I can remember, but which ones worked well, or if we want to look at the other recommendations that we'd like to replace one of those so that we can put together. And then just remember that these are all confidential because we want to be able to get honest and open answers from our candidates.
How long are we planning the interview to be?
So
We
it's,
did 30 minutes.
yeah, it's gonna depend on the structure that you use. So, last time we did panel interviews, so there were multiple people sitting at the table, if you were here waiting for that. So, it's gonna depend on the structure. If you decide you wanna do individual interviews, then that may look a little bit different.
But I think we did 5-minute answers.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
When we did that, that was done on a Saturday as well, so.
Correct.
So it was nobody really thinking about getting up for work the next day.
That was also partly because it was in the middle of the summer and we had a much shorter window to try to get the vacancy filled. So we were trying to work around everybody's schedule with vacations and those kinds of things as well. Mrs. Ratchford is actually going to probably send a survey to you as board members asking for your top 3 questions from the question list so that we can start with compiling something that you can work from. I don't know if you've ever tried to write interview questions for an interview, but it can take a really long time if you don't kind of have a jumping off point. So I think she's going to start with that. You really are probably only going to be able to ask maybe 10 questions at the most, depending on how involved the question is. So what we're going to try to do is, I think there will probably be duplication. We'd like to kind of get started, and we'll bring you back maybe a prioritized list for you to help with maybe your discussion.
So can I ask a clarifying question about the questions? So if we have an additional question, should we email that back to Ms. Ratchford or?
Yeah, so if you see something that is not represented in the question list, then if you would make that one of your questions. So choose 2 and then send the one you want that's not included.
Okay.
And that way we make sure we put it in the list of options.
Okay.
How did the panel work? Did it work fairly well? Did you feel like was it awkward? I'm just, and how many candidates? I guess it always depends on how
I
many.
think we had 8 last time.
No,
It
it
was
was
6,
it was- yeah, it was less. It
So
was-
you did all 6 at once?
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
were all there.
It surprisingly, it was not necessarily awkward.
It wasn't like the forums we went through
No.
with the candidates? Okay.
There was a little bit of idea sharing, but that you get in a forum where people share their idea and then the next person says, well, it's somewhat similar, but here's my different spin on it. So there was a little bit of that that you wouldn't get in an individual interview. But I wouldn't say it was a lot of it, but That is the one downside of a panel.
And if that's the structure that you choose to do, there are some strategies that you can use around that structure that allow you to ask different questions. So you can use themes instead of actual questions. So you may have a theme of student achievement. And maybe there's 2 or 3 questions that you have for student achievement, and you may ask, different people at the table something about that same theme to try to get some different places. So you can use different strategies. I think once you see who the applicants are and you decide how many people you want to interview, it's going to maybe drive which structure you want to use.
The one question I want to ask, has anybody expressed interest yet? I mean, officially.
Yes, we have had some people submit applications.
So is there any other questions for Dan then? Okay. Well, hopefully that was quick. I can drag it on some more if you'd like. What do you want to go to, 8?
No, thank you. I do really just have, how many have so far submitted?
I wish I could tell you the answer to that, but unfortunately today was a Monday, Tuesday, and so I didn't even ask Chris how many more we've had submitted over the weekend. So it's more than 2, but less than 10, I can tell you that.
All right. Okay, well, I guess that is the end. I'm assuming we have no any comments on what we're doing at this point. So at 7:41, we can adjourn the Learning and Teaching Committee meeting.
Okay, thank you.